If love can disappear in a single message, then maybe dignity can be rebuilt in a single moment. The chapel felt too quiet for a wedding day, the kind of silence that pressed against your chest and made every breath sound louder than it should be, and Emily Carter stood at the altar in a white dress she had bought on clearance 3 months ago, her fingers trembling slightly around a bouquet of pale roses that were already beginning to wilt under the warm overhead lights, while 50 pairs of eyes watched her without pretending not to, whispers moving through the wooden pews like a low tide pulling judgment closer with every passing second, and somewhere in the back, a phone camera lifted just high enough to capture the scene everyone would later call unfortunate, or worse, predictable, because people always had opinions about women like her, a single mom trying to start over, trying to believe that this time, someone had chosen her for real, and not just for convenience. Her phone buzzed softly in her hand, a small sound that somehow echoed through the entire room, and for a moment she didn't look at it, because hope can be fragile like that, because as long as she didn't read the message, there was still a version of this day where the doors would open and he would walk in, slightly out of breath, apologizing, smiling, reaching for her hand, but reality has a way of arriving whether you invite it or not, and when she finally lowered her gaze, the screen lit up with 6 words that erased everything she had built in her mind: I'm sorry. I can't do this. Her breath caught, not dramatically, not loudly, just enough that her chest tightened and her grip on the bouquet loosened, a few petals slipping silently to the polished floor beneath her heels, and the murmurs grew sharper now, less hidden, as if her humiliation had given people permission to speak freely, one woman leaning toward another with a quiet, "Didn't she have a kid already?" And Emily felt the weight of it all, not just the absence of the man who was supposed to meet her here, but the presence of everyone else who had come to witness her being left behind, and for a second she thought about running, just turning and walking straight out of the chapel, grabbing her son, Ethan, and disappearing before the whispers turned into something louder, something permanent. But then she saw him, sitting near the back, a man she didn't recognize, dressed in a simple dark suit that didn't demand attention, yet somehow held it, his posture calm, his eyes not judging, not curious, just steady, and while everyone else looked at her like she was a story unfolding, he looked at her like she was a person standing on the edge of breaking, and that difference, small as it was, felt like the only solid thing in the room, and as the officiant cleared his throat awkwardly, unsure whether to continue or stop, and Emily's fingers tightened again, this time not around hope but around the last thread of her dignity, the man in the back stood up, slowly, deliberately, and began walking down the aisle toward her, each step measured, each movement cutting through the noise until the whispers faded into something distant, something irrelevant, and when he finally reached her, close enough that she could see the calm in his eyes and the quiet certainty in his expression, he leaned in just slightly, his voice low, meant only for her, and said, "Let me fix this." Emily did not move right away, her mind still catching up with what he had just said, the words echoing in the hollow space where her plans used to be, and for a second she wondered if she had imagined it, if stress and humiliation had created some strange illusion of rescue, but the man did not step back, did not look away, he simply waited, calm in a way that felt almost out of place in a room filled with quiet judgment. And when she finally turned her head just enough to look at him, really look at him, she saw something she had not seen all morning, not in the guests, not in the empty doorway, not even in herself, certainty. "I do not know you," she whispered, her voice barely steady, the words catching between disbelief and caution, and he gave the smallest nod, as if acknowledging that truth without being threatened by it. "You do not have to," he replied softly, his tone even, controlled. "This is not about me. It is about you walking out of here with your head up, and something about the way." He said it, not heroic, not dramatic, just simple and grounded, made her chest tighten in a different way, because no one had framed it like that before, not as saving her, but as restoring something she was about to lose. Behind them, the officiant shifted awkwardly, glancing between them and the restless audience, while a child's soft sniffle broke through the tension. And Emily's heart dropped as she turned slightly to see Ethan sitting in the second row, his small hands clutching the edge of the seat, his eyes wide and confused, not fully understanding what was happening but sensing enough to feel it, and that was the moment everything became clear. This was no longer about pride or embarrassment, it was about what her son would remember, whether he would remember his mother standing alone or standing strong. She swallowed hard, her fingers tightening around the bouquet that had already begun to fall apart. And when she looked back at the man beside her, there was still no pressure in his expression, only patience, as if he was giving her the space to choose, and that mattered more than anything, because for the first time that morning, the choice was hers. "What do I have to do?" she asked quietly, and he leaned in just slightly, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "Nothing complicated, just trust me for the next 5 minutes," and it sounded impossible and yet strangely reasonable. 5 minutes compared to everything she had already lost. 5 minutes to change the story unfolding in front of everyone. Emily took a slow breath, feeling the weight of every eye still on her, the expectations, the judgment, the quiet predictions of failure, and then she nodded, once, small but certain, and the man straightened, turning toward the officiant with a composed ease that immediately shifted the energy in the room. "We are ready," he said clearly, his voice carrying just enough authority to silence the whispers, and a ripple of confusion passed through the guests as heads turned, trying to make sense of what they were witnessing, while Emily felt his hand gently take hers, steady, warm, not possessive, just supportive, like an anchor placed exactly where she needed it. The officiant blinked, clearly caught off guard. "I am sorry, sir, I do not believe I have your name," and for the briefest moment the man paused, his gaze flicking to Emily as if to confirm she was still with him, still choosing this, and when she did not pull away, he looked forward again, his expression calm, almost unreadable. "My name is Daniel Hayes," he said, and though the name meant nothing to Emily yet, the way he carried it made the room shift again, subtle but undeniable, as if something important had just entered the space. And as the ceremony hesitantly resumed, words spoken out of order, emotions running ahead of logic, Emily felt something unexpected rise beneath the shock and uncertainty, not happiness, not yet, but something steadier, something that felt like the beginning of standing again, even if she did not yet know who the man beside her truly was or why he had chosen to step into her broken moment as if it had always been meant for him to be there. The words of the ceremony moved forward, but Emily barely heard them, each sentence from the officiant sounding distant, like it was happening in another room, while her hand remained in Daniel's, steady and grounded in a way that felt unfamiliar yet strangely reassuring. And when the officiant asked if they would exchange vows, a hesitation passed through the air, subtle but noticeable, because this was the part no one had prepared for, not the guests, not the officiant, and certainly not Emily, whose heart was still catching up with the reality that she was standing beside a man she had met less than 5 minutes ago, yet somehow trusting him more than the one who had promised her forever. Daniel turned slightly toward her, his expression softening just enough to feel human, not rehearsed, not performative. And when he spoke, his voice was calm but carried a quiet weight that reached further than the words themselves. "I promise that today, you will not stand alone," he said. And it was not a traditional vow, not something written in a book or expected in a ceremony, but it landed with more truth than anything she had heard all morning, and Emily felt her throat tighten as she realized he was not pretending in the way she thought he would, he was not acting for the crowd, he was choosing his words carefully, as if they mattered. Even in a moment built on improvisation, the room had gone completely silent now, the earlier whispers replaced by a kind of suspended attention, as if everyone sensed that something real was happening beneath the unexpected surface. And when it was her turn, Emily hesitated, her mind searching for something to say that would not feel empty or false, but all she could think about was Ethan, sitting just a few feet away, watching her with those wide, searching eyes, and so she spoke to that. To him, to the part of herself that refused to break completely. "I promise," she began softly, her voice steadier than she expected, "that I will keep moving forward, no matter how hard it gets." And it was not a vow to Daniel, not really, it was a promise to herself, but somehow it felt like enough. The officiant cleared his throat again, adjusting his tone as he continued, now more confident, as if the moment had found its own direction. And when he asked for the rings, a flicker of uncertainty crossed Emily's face, because there were none. Not for this version of the ceremony, not for this man, but before the silence could stretch too far, Daniel reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a simple silver band, not extravagant, not designed to impress, just clean and understated, and for a second, Emily stared at it, surprised, wondering how he had anticipated even this, how he had stepped into chaos with something that resembled preparation. He did not explain, did not draw attention to it, he simply took her hand gently. sliding the ring onto her finger with a careful motion that felt deliberate, respectful, as if acknowledging the weight of what this symbol meant, even in a situation built on urgency. And when their eyes met again, there was a brief moment where everything else faded, the guests, the tension, the confusion, leaving only the quiet understanding that whatever this was, it was no longer just an act. By the power vested in me, the officiant said, his voice now steady and clear, I pronounce you husband and wife, and the words seemed to echo differently this time, not as a conclusion, but as the beginning of something no one in that room had expected. And as a soft gasp moved through the audience, Emily felt Daniel's hand tighten just slightly around hers, not enough to hold her in place, just enough to remind her that she was still standing, still seen, still not alone. And for the first time since the message had shattered her world, she lifted her chin, not out of defiance, but out of something quieter, something stronger, the fragile return of dignity she thought she had lost forever. The sound of polite applause followed, hesitant at first, then growing louder as people adjusted to what they had just witnessed, turning confusion into something socially acceptable, because clapping was easier than questioning, and Emily felt the shift immediately, the same room that had been filled with judgment now offering something that resembled approval, even if it was only surface deep, and beside her, Daniel did not react to it at all, his posture unchanged, his expression calm, as if none of this had been for the audience in the first place. His hand remained lightly at the small of her back as he guided her down the aisle, not controlling, not possessive, just steady, a quiet signal that she did not have to navigate the next few steps alone. And as they passed the rows of guests, Emily could feel the eyes still on her, but they felt different now, less sharp, less certain, as if the narrative they had already decided no longer fit the ending they had just seen. When they reached Ethan, the little boy stood quickly, his face a mix of confusion and hope, and Emily's heart softened instantly as she knelt slightly, brushing a hand through his hair. It is okay, she whispered, though she was not entirely sure what that meant yet, and Ethan looked past her to Daniel, studying him with the honest curiosity only a child could have. Is he coming with us? He asked quietly, and the simplicity of the question made something tighten in her chest again, because children did not care about explanations, they only cared about presence. Daniel crouched down just enough to meet Ethan at eye level, not imposing, not distant. If that is all right with you, he said gently, his tone carrying the same calm certainty he had shown her, and Ethan nodded after a brief pause, as if making a decision of his own, one that did not require overthinking, and for a moment, Emily realized that trust, real trust, sometimes looked exactly like that, simple and unforced. Outside the chapel, the afternoon light felt brighter than it should have, almost disorienting after the tension inside, and a sleek black car waited near the curb, its presence quiet but unmistakable, the kind of car that did not need attention because it naturally drew it, and a man in a tailored suit stepped forward as they approached, opening the rear door with practiced ease. Dr. Hayes, he said respectfully, his voice low but clear enough for Emily to catch, and the title landed differently now, not just a profession, but something layered, something that hinted at a world far beyond what she had assumed. Emily glanced at Daniel, searching his face for some kind of explanation, but he simply gave a small nod, acknowledging the moment without turning it into something larger. Let us get you somewhere quiet, he said to her, his voice softer now, more personal, and she hesitated for just a second, her eyes flicking back toward the chapel, toward the life that had unraveled in less than an hour. But there was nothing there for her anymore, only echoes of what could have been. She took a breath and stepped toward the car, Ethan's small hand slipping into hers, grounding her in a way nothing else could, and as they settled into the back seat, the door closing with a soft, final sound, Emily realized that she had not asked a single real question yet, not about who Daniel truly was, not about why he had stepped in, not about what any of this meant beyond the moment they had just survived. And for the first time since he had spoken those quiet words at the altar, uncertainty crept back in, not as fear, but as awareness, because whatever this was, it was no longer just about leaving with dignity, it was about stepping into something she did not understand, with a man who had just changed the course of her life without asking for anything in return. And as the car pulled away from the curb, the chapel shrinking in the distance, Emily looked down at the simple silver ring on her finger, its weight suddenly real, and wondered not how she had ended up here, but where exactly this unexpected beginning was going to take her. The car moved smoothly through the city streets, the quiet hum of the engine filling the space between them, and for a while no one spoke, not because there was nothing to say, but because everything felt too new, too undefined, and Emily sat with her hands resting in her lap, her fingers occasionally brushing against the cool metal of the ring, as if confirming it was real, while Ethan leaned slightly against her side, his small body finally relaxing after the emotional storm he did not fully understand, his eyes drifting toward the window as buildings passed by in a blur of glass and sunlight. Across from them, Daniel remained composed, his posture straight but not rigid, his gaze occasionally shifting toward them, not intrusive, just observant, like someone making sure everything was still holding together. After a few minutes, Emily exhaled slowly, breaking the silence. "You said 5 minutes," she murmured, her voice quiet but steady, and Daniel's lips curved into the faintest hint of a smile, not amused, more like acknowledging a fair point. "I did," he replied, his tone calm. "And those 5 minutes are over." He paused briefly, as if choosing his next words carefully. "You are free to walk away from this the moment we stop the car," and there was no pressure in the statement, no expectation, just a clear line drawn, giving her back control in a way she had not realized she needed. Emily looked at him then, really looked this time, taking in the details she had missed before. The quiet confidence in the way he held himself, the absence of urgency in his movements, the kind of calm that usually came from experience, from having faced situations that required composure rather than reaction. "Then why did you do it?" she asked, not accusing, just needing to understand, and for a moment, Daniel did not answer immediately, his gaze shifting briefly toward the passing street before returning to her. "Because no one should be left standing alone like that," he said simply. And there was no performance in it, no attempt to impress, just a statement that felt grounded in something deeper than the moment itself. Emily absorbed that, her mind turning over the simplicity of his reasoning, because it did not come with conditions, did not come with expectations, and that alone made it harder to process. "You do not even know me," she added, softer now, and he nodded slightly. "That is true," he said, "but I know enough." And when she frowned slightly, confused, he clarified without hesitation, "I know what it looks like when someone is trying to hold everything together for someone else." His eyes flicked briefly toward Ethan, "And I know what it costs when they are the only one doing it," and the words landed with quiet precision, because they were not guesses, they were observations, and Emily felt something shift inside her again, not fear this time, not even uncertainty, but recognition, the uncomfortable kind that came when someone saw more than you intended to show. Ethan stirred slightly beside her, looking up at Daniel with open curiosity. "Are you really a doctor?" he asked, his voice small but clear, and Daniel's expression softened almost immediately, the sharp edges of his composure easing just enough to reveal warmth. "Yes," he replied gently, "I am," and Ethan nodded, satisfied with the answer in a way only a child could be, as if that single detail was enough to define everything else. The car slowed as it approached an intersection, sunlight shifting across the interior, catching the subtle details of Daniel's watch, the clean lines of his suit, the quiet indicators of a life that operated on a different level than hers, and Emily felt the gap between their worlds more clearly now, not intimidating, but undeniable. "This does not have to mean anything," she said after a moment, her voice careful, as if testing the boundaries of what they had just created, and Daniel inclined his head slightly, accepting that without resistance. "It does not," he agreed, "unless you want it to," and again, he left the decision with her, placing no weight on it, no expectation, just possibility. The car came to a gentle stop, and for a brief second, everything felt suspended again, like the moment at the altar, a choice waiting to be made, and as Emily looked down at her hand, at the ring that had been placed there in the middle of chaos, she realized that this time, the decision was not about escaping embarrassment or avoiding judgment. It was about whether she was ready to step into something unknown, not because she had to, but because she could, and slowly, she lifted her gaze to meet Daniel's, the question no longer about why he had helped her, but about what came next if she chose not to walk away. Emily did not reach for the door handle when the car stopped, and that alone felt like an answer, even if she had not said it out loud yet, the silence stretching just long enough for the moment to settle into something real, something chosen rather than forced. And beside her, Ethan shifted again, his small hand tightening around hers as he looked between them, sensing that something important was happening even if he could not name it. Outside, the city moved as it always did, people crossing streets, cars passing by, life continuing without pause, and inside the car, everything felt suspended, as if time had narrowed down to this single decision. Emily finally spoke, her voice quiet but no longer uncertain. "I am not ready to walk away," and the words felt heavier than they sounded, because they carried more than just the moment. They carried every time she had been left behind, every time she had had to rebuild on her own, every time she had chosen survival over possibility, and this time, she was choosing something different, even if she did not fully understand what it was yet. Daniel did not respond immediately, but there was a subtle shift in his expression, not surprise, not relief, just acknowledgement, as if he had expected nothing and yet respected everything about her choice. "Then we take this one step at a time," he said calmly, his tone steady as ever, no expectations, no pressure, just clarity, and the way he said it made it feel less like a promise and more like a boundary, something solid she could stand on instead of something she might fall from. The driver glanced briefly in the rearview mirror, waiting, and Daniel gave a small nod. "Take us to the house," he instructed, his voice quiet but decisive, and the car moved again, merging back into the flow of traffic as if the pause had never happened, yet everything inside felt different now, more defined, more intentional. Emily leaned back slightly against the seat, her mind trying to catch up with the pace of her own life, because less than an hour ago she had been standing in a chapel, abandoned, and now she was driving through the city with a man who had stepped into that moment without hesitation and was now offering her something she had not planned for. Something that did not come with conditions or timelines, and that alone made it harder to process, because she was used to terms, to expectations, to knowing exactly what something cost before she agreed to it. "Where is the house?" she asked after a moment, her voice softer now, more grounded, and Daniel glanced toward her briefly before answering. "About 15 minutes from here," he said, then added, "It is quiet, private. You and Ethan can rest there for as long as you need." And again, there was no implication beyond what he said, no hidden meaning layered underneath, just a straightforward offer that left the decision entirely in her hands. Ethan looked up again, his curiosity returning as the tension eased. "Do you have toys there?" he asked, and the question was so simple, so unaffected by everything else, that it drew the faintest hint of warmth into the space, and Daniel nodded without hesitation. "I think we can find something," he replied gently, and Ethan seemed satisfied with that, leaning back into his seat with the quiet trust of a child who believed things would work out if the adults around him sounded calm enough. The city outside began to change gradually, the buildings giving way to wider streets, quieter neighborhoods, the noise softening into something more distant, and Emily watched it all pass by, her reflection faint in the window, the ring catching the light as her hand shifted slightly, and she realized that for the first time in a long while, she was not thinking about what she had lost, she was thinking about what might come next, not with certainty, not with expectation, but with a cautious openness that felt unfamiliar yet necessary. She turned her head slightly, looking at Daniel again, studying the man who had entered her life in the most unexpected way possible, and though she still did not know his full story, did not understand the depth of the world he came from, she recognized one thing clearly now: he had not stepped in to control her story, he had stepped in to give it back to her, and that difference, subtle but profound, was the reason she had not opened the car door when she had the chance. The car turned onto a quieter street lined with tall trees and wide sidewalks, the kind of neighborhood that felt intentionally removed from the noise of the city, where everything seemed slower, more controlled, and Emily felt that shift immediately, not just in the surroundings but in the way the air itself seemed to settle, as if this place operated under a different rhythm entirely. The vehicle slowed as it approached a set of iron gates that opened smoothly without hesitation, revealing a long driveway that curved gently toward a modern house set back from the road, its clean lines and expansive windows reflecting the late afternoon light, not overly extravagant, but unmistakably designed with intention, with space, with privacy. Ethan leaned forward slightly, pressing his small hand against the window, his eyes widening just a little. "Is this where you live?" he asked, his voice filled with a mix of curiosity and quiet excitement, and Daniel gave a small nod. "For now," he replied, and the answer, simple as it was, carried a subtle hint that his life might not be tied to one place the way hers had always been. The car came to a gentle stop near the front entrance, and before Emily could fully gather her thoughts, the door opened, the same man from earlier stepping aside respectfully, and for a moment, Emily hesitated again, not because she wanted to leave, but because stepping out of the car felt like stepping into something that would make everything even more real, more permanent in a way she could not yet define. Daniel stepped out first, turning back slightly, offering his hand without expectation, and after a brief pause, she accepted it, the gesture small but grounding, and Ethan followed close behind, staying near her side as they moved toward the house. Inside, the space was quiet, open, filled with soft natural light that filtered through the large windows, and there was a sense of order to everything, not sterile, not impersonal, but carefully maintained, as if every detail had been chosen with purpose rather than excess, and Emily found herself taking it in slowly, her eyes moving from one corner to another, trying to understand the life that existed here, a life that felt far removed from her own reality of small apartments and constant adjustments. "You can use any room on the first floor," Daniel said, his voice even, giving her space rather than directing her. "There is a guest room down the hall, and the kitchen is fully stocked," and again, there was no pressure in the offer, no expectation that she would stay longer than she chose to, just an open door placed in front of her. Ethan had already begun to move a little further into the space, his earlier tension replaced by cautious curiosity, his steps light but eager as he glanced around. "It is so big," he said quietly, and Emily felt a faint, almost unfamiliar warmth at hearing that, not because of the size of the house, but because for once, her son was seeing something beyond limitations, beyond what they had to manage with, and that alone made the moment feel significant. She turned back to Daniel, her expression thoughtful now, less guarded than before. "You do this often?" she asked, not accusing, just trying to place him, trying to understand the kind of man who would step into a stranger's life so easily, and Daniel shook his head once, the answer immediate, "No," he said simply, and there was no elaboration, no attempt to make it sound more meaningful than it was, just the truth, which somehow made it more believable. Emily studied him for a moment longer, searching for something hidden, some motive she might have missed, but there was nothing in his expression that suggested anything beyond what he had already shown, and that absence of complexity, that lack of hidden intention, was what made everything feel both safer and more uncertain at the same time. She exhaled quietly, her shoulders relaxing just slightly, and for the first time since the morning had unraveled, she allowed herself to step fully into the present moment, not thinking about what had happened or what might happen next, just acknowledging where she was now, standing in a place she had never imagined, with a man she had never planned to meet, and realizing that sometimes the most unexpected turns were not about losing control, but about being given a chance to start again, even if the path forward had not yet revealed itself. The house settled into a quiet rhythm as the initial unfamiliarity began to soften, the kind of silence that did not feel empty but intentional, like a space that allowed breathing room after everything had happened, and Emily found herself standing near the large window in the living area, her reflection faint against the glass as the late afternoon light stretched across the polished floor, while behind her, Ethan had already discovered a small basket of neatly arranged toys tucked beside a low shelf, his earlier uncertainty fading into quiet engagement as he picked up a wooden car and rolled it gently along the surface, testing the space in the only way a child knew how. Daniel remained a few steps away, not hovering, not retreating, simply present, giving the moment room to unfold without inserting himself into it, and that distance, respectful and measured, made Emily feel less like a guest and more like someone being given time to decide where she stood. "You can stay here as long as you need," he said after a moment, his voice calm, not breaking the silence so much as joining it, and Emily turned slightly, her gaze shifting from the window to him, searching again for something she might have missed. Some sign that this offer came with an expectation she had not yet uncovered, but there was none, just the same steady composure, the same absence of urgency. "People do not usually offer that without a reason," she replied, her tone thoughtful rather than defensive, and Daniel considered that for a brief second before answering. "Then let the reason be that you needed a place to land," he said simply, and the words lingered in the space between them, not dramatic, not persuasive, just grounded in a kind of logic she had not encountered often, the kind that did not require justification beyond itself. Emily let that settle, her shoulders easing just slightly as she glanced toward Ethan again, watching him now more at ease than she had seen him all day, and something inside her shifted with that, because whatever uncertainty she carried, it was balanced by the quiet reality that her son felt safe enough to explore, and that mattered more than anything else. She moved slowly through the room, her steps measured, taking in the details more carefully now, the framed photographs on a distant shelf, the absence of clutter, the way everything seemed organized without feeling cold, and she stopped briefly near a hallway that led deeper into the house, the open door at the end revealing a guest room with soft lighting and a neatly made bed, simple but inviting, and for a moment, the idea of rest felt almost unfamiliar, like something she had not allowed herself in a long time. There are fresh clothes in the closet, Daniel added quietly from where he stood, different sizes, just in case, and Emily turned back toward him, a flicker of surprise crossing her face, not because of the offer itself, but because of the thought behind it, the anticipation of needs without intrusion, and she nodded once. A small acknowledgement that carried more weight than a longer response might have. Ethan's voice broke gently through the moment. "Mom, can I stay here for a little while?" he asked, looking up at her with cautious hope, and Emily felt that familiar pull again, the responsibility, the instinct to protect, but also the recognition that sometimes protection meant allowing space rather than controlling it, and she gave a small nod. "For a little while," she said softly, and Ethan smiled in a way that felt rare, unburdened by the tension of the morning. Daniel watched that exchange without comment, his expression unreadable but not distant, as if he understood the significance of that small moment without needing to define it, and as Emily looked at him again, standing there in a space that felt both unfamiliar and unexpectedly calm, she realized that this was no longer just about what had happened at the chapel, it was about what she was choosing now, not out of desperation, not out of fear, but out of a quiet willingness to see where this path might lead, even if it was still unclear, even if it required her to trust something she had not planned for. And as the light shifted further across the room, she felt, for the first time in a long while, that uncertainty did not have to mean instability, sometimes it simply meant that the story was still unfolding. Evening settled slowly over the house, the golden light fading into a softer shade of blue as the large windows reflected the quiet transition of the sky, and Emily found herself sitting at the edge of the guest room bed, her hands resting loosely in her lap, the events of the day finally catching up with her now that everything had grown still, while down the hall, the faint sound of Ethan's laughter drifted through the open space, light and unguarded in a way she had not heard in weeks, and that sound alone grounded her. More than anything else could. She exhaled slowly, her gaze dropping to the ring again, turning it slightly against her finger as if trying to understand its place in her life, because just hours ago it had been a symbol of something she believed in. Then it became a reminder of rejection, and now it sat there again, quietly reshaped into something else entirely, something she had not yet defined. A soft knock on the partially open door pulled her attention up, and Daniel stood there, not stepping in immediately, giving her the option to invite him into the space rather than assuming it, and she nodded once, a small gesture that felt easier now than it had earlier, and he entered with the same measured calm, his presence filling the room without overwhelming it. "Ethan is asking if he can stay up a little longer," he said, his tone neutral but gentle, as if understanding that even small decisions might feel different tonight, and Emily allowed a faint smile to touch her expression, something subtle but real. "He can," she replied softly, "just for tonight," and Daniel inclined his head slightly, acknowledging the decision without comment, before pausing as if there was something more to say, something he was considering whether to bring forward or leave alone. "There is something you should know," he said after a moment, his voice steady but quieter than before, and Emily felt a slight tension return, not fear, but awareness, as if the calm of the house was about to shift into something more defined, more revealing. She straightened just a little, her attention fully on him now. "What is it?" she asked, her tone composed but attentive, and Daniel did not rush his answer, his gaze steady as he spoke. "When I gave my name earlier, some of the people in that room recognized it," he said, not as a statement of importance, but as a fact, and Emily's brow furrowed slightly, the memory of the subtle shift in the chapel returning, the way the room had changed in a way she had not fully understood at the time. "I am not just a doctor," he continued, his voice even, "I run a network of hospitals across the state," and the words settled into the space between them with quiet weight, not dramatic, not exaggerated, but significant in a way that expanded everything she thought she knew about him. Emily blinked once, absorbing that, her mind quickly connecting the details she had noticed earlier, the car, the house, the way people addressed him, and suddenly those pieces formed a clearer picture, one that made the gap between their lives even more pronounced. Yet strangely, it did not feel intimidating in the way she might have expected. It felt clarifying, like understanding the full scope of something she had already stepped into. "Why tell me now?" she asked after a moment, her voice steady, and Daniel met her gaze without hesitation. "Because you deserve to know who you are dealing with before you decide anything further," he said, and there was no pride in his tone, no attempt to impress, just transparency offered at the right moment, and Emily felt something settle within her again, a quiet recognition that this was consistent with everything he had shown so far. No pressure, no hidden conditions, just information placed in front of her so she could choose with clarity. She looked down briefly, considering it, then back up at him, her expression thoughtful rather than overwhelmed. "And what exactly am I deciding?" she asked, and Daniel's answer came without pause. "Whether this ends as a moment that helped you stand back up," he said calmly, "or the beginning of something we both agree to figure out, one step at a time," and the simplicity of that choice, laid out without expectation or urgency, felt heavier than any demand could have been, because it required her to look beyond survival and consider possibility. And as the quiet of the evening settled around them, Emily realized that for the first time, she was not being asked to hold everything together alone. She was being given the space to decide what came next, fully, honestly, and on her own terms. Daniel's words lingered in the room long after he finished speaking, not because they were complicated, but because they were simple in a way Emily was not used to, and she sat there for a moment, letting the silence settle instead of rushing to fill it, her fingers brushing lightly against the ring again as if grounding herself in something tangible while everything else remained uncertain. Down the hall, Ethan's laughter had softened into quieter sounds, the kind that came when a child was growing tired but did not want the day to end, and that small detail reminded her how much had changed in just a few hours, how quickly her life had shifted from something structured, even if fragile, into something entirely unplanned, yet somehow more stable than what she had lost. She looked back up at Daniel, studying him with a different kind of attention now, not searching for flaws or hidden motives, but trying to understand the consistency in his actions, the way everything he had done so far aligned with what he was saying now. No pressure, no urgency, just space. "You make it sound simple," she said quietly, and there was no accusation in her tone, only observation, and Daniel gave a slight nod, acknowledging that without trying to correct it. "It is simple," he replied, "but that does not mean it is easy," and the distinction mattered more than she expected, because it left room for difficulty without turning the situation into something overwhelming. Emily exhaled slowly, her gaze drifting briefly toward the doorway before returning to him. "I have spent a long time making decisions based on what I had to do," she said, her voice steady but softer now, "not what I wanted to do," and saying it out loud felt different, like naming something she had carried without fully recognizing, and Daniel listened without interrupting, his attention focused but not intrusive, giving her the space to continue if she chose to. "And now," she added after a moment, "I do not know how to make a decision like this," and there was a quiet honesty in that admission, not weakness, just clarity, and for the first time, she did not feel the need to present herself as certain or composed, because there was no expectation from him that she should be. Daniel stepped a little closer, not enough to close the distance completely, just enough to shift the conversation into something more direct. "Then do not decide everything tonight," he said calmly, "decide the next step, and nothing more." And the simplicity of that approach landed differently than anything else had, because it removed the pressure of defining the future and replaced it with something manageable, something she could actually hold on to. Emily considered that, her shoulders relaxing slightly as the weight of the moment shifted, becoming something less overwhelming, and she nodded once, slowly, as if testing the decision as she made it. "Then the next step is staying," she said, her voice quiet but clear, and Daniel inclined his head in acknowledgement, not treating it as a victory or a commitment, just a choice she had made for herself. "Then you stay," he replied, his tone steady, and with that, the tension in the room seemed to ease, not disappearing entirely, but settling into something more balanced. Something that allowed space for both uncertainty and calm. A soft sound from the hallway drew their attention, and Ethan appeared at the doorway, rubbing one eye with his hand, his earlier energy fading into sleepiness. "Mom," he said softly, "I am tired," and Emily's expression softened immediately as she stood, crossing the small distance to him, brushing a hand gently through his hair. "I know," she murmured, her voice warm in a way it had not been all day, and she glanced back at Daniel briefly, a silent acknowledgement passing between them before she led Ethan toward the guest room. As she helped him settle onto the bed, pulling the blanket up around him and watching his eyes close within moments, Emily felt something shift again, quieter this time, less about survival and more about presence, about being able to pause without everything falling apart, and when she finally stepped back into the hallway, the house still and calm around her, she realized that for the first time in a long time, the next step did not feel like something she had to fight for, it felt like something she was allowed to choose. The hallway remained quiet after Emily stepped out of the guest room, the soft glow of a nearby lamp casting warm light across the floor, and for a moment she simply stood there, listening to the steady rhythm of Ethan's breathing from inside, a quiet reassurance that grounded her more than anything else had that day, and as she closed the door gently behind her, she realized how rare it felt to pause without anticipating the next problem, the next responsibility waiting to demand her attention. She walked slowly back toward the living area, her steps lighter now, not because everything was resolved, but because for the first time, she was not carrying it all alone, and when she reached the open space again, Daniel was there, standing near the window with his hands loosely at his sides, his posture relaxed but thoughtful, as if he had been giving her the time she needed without interruption. He turned slightly when he heard her approach, his expression unchanged in its calm, yet there was something quieter in it now, something that suggested he understood the significance of the moment without needing to comment on it. "He is asleep," Emily said softly, and Daniel nodded once, acknowledging it without adding unnecessary words, and for a second, neither of them spoke, the silence between them no longer uncertain, but steady, like something that did not need to be filled. Emily moved a little closer, her gaze shifting briefly toward the window where the last light of the day had almost faded, the sky now a deep shade of blue, and she let out a slow breath, feeling the weight of everything that had happened settle into something more manageable. "You said this could just be a moment," she said after a while, her voice quiet but clear, and Daniel met her gaze, giving her his full attention. "Yes," he replied, "it can be," and there was no hesitation in his answer, no attempt to steer her in a different direction. She nodded slightly, absorbing that, then continued, "But moments do not usually change everything," and there was a subtle shift in her tone now, not doubt, but reflection, as if she was beginning to understand something she had not expected to consider. Daniel's expression softened just a fraction, the kind of change that was easy to miss if you were not paying attention. "Sometimes they do," he said calmly, "not because they are dramatic, but because they happen at the exact moment someone decides not to fall," and the words settled between them with a quiet clarity, not overwhelming, but precise, and Emily felt them resonate in a way she could not easily explain, because they did not feel like something meant to persuade her. They felt like something meant to remind her of what she had already done. She looked down briefly, her hand brushing against the ring again, not questioning it this time, just acknowledging its presence, its meaning still undefined but no longer uncomfortable, and when she looked back up, there was a steadiness in her expression that had not been there earlier, something more grounded, more certain in its own quiet way. "I do not know what this becomes," she admitted, her voice honest but no longer uncertain, and Daniel inclined his head slightly, accepting that without needing to resolve it. "You do not have to," he said, "you only have to know what it is right now," and again, he brought the focus back to something simple, something present, something she could hold on to without being overwhelmed by what might come next. Emily let that settle, the tension that had once defined the day now replaced by something calmer, something that allowed space for both questions and peace, and she realized that while she did not have answers yet, she was no longer afraid of that, because for once, not knowing did not mean she was alone, it simply meant the story was still unfolding, and as the quiet of the evening wrapped around them, she understood that whatever came next would not be something she was forced into, it would be something she chose, step by step, with clarity, with dignity, and with the quiet strength she had almost forgotten she had. The night deepened around the house, the last traces of daylight replaced by a quiet stillness that seemed to settle into every corner, and Emily found herself standing near the kitchen counter now, her hands wrapped loosely around a glass of water she had not taken a sip from, her thoughts moving slower than before, no longer racing to keep up with everything that had happened, but unfolding one layer at a time, as if her mind was finally allowing itself to process what her heart had already begun to accept. Daniel remained nearby, not watching her directly, but present in that same steady way he had been all day, his attention never intrusive, yet never absent, and for a moment, Emily realized how unfamiliar that balance felt, the absence of pressure, the absence of expectation, the quiet offering of presence without demand. "What happens tomorrow?" she asked after a while, her voice calm but thoughtful, and the question did not carry fear, only curiosity, as if she was no longer bracing for something to go wrong, but instead trying to understand what moving forward might look like. Daniel turned slightly toward her, considering the question with the same measured composure. "Tomorrow, you wake up," he said simply, "you have breakfast, you check on Ethan, and you decide what you want your next step to be," and there was something grounding in the way he answered, not projecting into the future, not outlining a plan, just bringing everything back to something real, something immediate, and Emily felt a faint, almost unexpected sense of relief at that, because it meant she did not have to solve everything tonight, she did not have to define what this was or what it would become, she only had to exist in the next moment and choose from there. She nodded slowly, her gaze drifting toward the hallway where Ethan slept, and for the first time in a long while, the thought of tomorrow did not feel overwhelming, it felt open, undefined in a way that carried possibility instead of pressure. "And you," she said after a moment, her eyes returning to Daniel, "where do you fit into that?" And the question was not demanding, not expectant, just honest, because she needed to understand the role he saw for himself beyond what had already happened. Daniel met her gaze without hesitation, his expression unchanged in its calm clarity. "That depends on what you want," he replied, his voice steady. "I do not step into your life unless you ask me to stay," and the simplicity of that answer carried more weight than anything else he could have said, because it placed the decision entirely in her hands, without condition, without persuasion. And Emily felt that settle into her in a way that felt both unfamiliar and empowering. She looked down briefly, her fingers brushing against the ring once more, not questioning it, not trying to define it, just acknowledging its presence as part of this moment, part of the path she was now standing on. And when she looked back up, there was a quiet determination in her expression, not fully formed, not yet decided, but present. "I am not ready to define this," she admitted, her voice steady, and Daniel inclined his head slightly, accepting that without resistance. "Then do not," he said, "let it be what it is, and nothing more." And again, he removed the pressure of expectation, leaving only the reality of the present moment, and that was what made it feel real, not forced, not rushed, just allowed. Emily exhaled softly, the tension she had carried throughout the day now replaced by something quieter, something steadier, and as she set the glass of water down on the counter, she realized that she was no longer trying to control what came next, she was allowing herself to experience it, step by step, without the constant need to prepare for the worst. The house remained still around them, the silence no longer heavy, but calm, and as she glanced once more toward the hallway, knowing Ethan was safe, asleep, and at peace, she felt something shift within her again. Not a dramatic change, not a sudden certainty, but a quiet readiness to continue, to move forward without fear dictating every decision. And as she stood there, in a place she had never imagined, beside a man she had never planned to meet, she understood that sometimes the most important turning points did not come with clear answers, they came with the simple opportunity to choose differently, and for the first time, she was ready to take that opportunity, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. The house rested in complete stillness as the night stretched deeper, the kind of quiet that no longer felt unfamiliar but earned, and Emily stood once more near the window, the reflection of her silhouette blending with the darkness outside, her hand resting lightly against the cool glass as she watched the faint glow of distant streetlights, her thoughts no longer racing ahead but settling into something steady, something grounded in the present rather than pulled between the past and the unknown future. Behind her, Daniel had stepped back into the living area, giving her space without needing to announce it, his presence still there, still constant, but no longer something she needed to measure or question, because by now, she understood the pattern. He did not take more than he was given, he did not move beyond what she allowed, and that consistency had become its own form of trust. Emily lowered her gaze slowly, her fingers brushing against the ring one last time, not as a question, not as a symbol she needed to define, but as a quiet acknowledgement of the moment that had changed everything, not because it was planned, but because it had happened when she needed it most. And she let out a soft breath, the weight of the day finally settling into something she could carry without it overwhelming her. She turned from the window then. Her steps slow but certain as she walked back toward the center of the room, and when Daniel looked up, there was no expectation in his expression, only attention, as if he understood that whatever she said next would come from a place that had taken time to reach. "I am not walking away tomorrow," she said, her voice calm, steady, and for the first time that day, fully her own. And the words did not sound like a decision made out of fear or urgency, they sounded like something chosen. Something considered, and Daniel nodded once, not reacting beyond that, not turning it into something larger than it was, just accepting it for what it meant. Emily held his gaze for a moment longer, then added, softer but just as certain, "Not because I have to stay, but because I want to understand what this could be," and there was no hesitation in her tone now, no trace of the uncertainty that had followed her earlier, just a quiet clarity that came from choosing instead of reacting. Daniel's expression shifted slightly then, not into something dramatic, but into something warmer, more human, the smallest change that acknowledged the meaning behind her words. "Then we will figure it out," he said, his voice even, "one step at a time," and the repetition of that idea no longer felt like a placeholder, it felt like a foundation, something simple enough to hold but strong enough to build on. The silence that followed was no longer empty, it was full in a way that felt balanced. Not demanding answers, not rushing forward, just allowing the moment to exist as it was, and Emily realized that this was what she had been missing, not certainty, not control, but the ability to stand in a moment without needing it to resolve immediately. She glanced once more toward the hallway, knowing Ethan was safe, asleep, and at peace, and that alone felt like more than enough reason to believe she had made the right choice for now. As she looked back at Daniel, there was no longer a question in her eyes, only awareness, the understanding that whatever this became, it would not be something forced or rushed, it would be something chosen, step by step, with intention, with clarity, and with a kind of quiet strength she had almost forgotten she carried. And as the night settled fully around them, wrapping the house in a calm that felt steady and real, Emily understood something she had not been able to see before, that sometimes the most important change did not come from finding the right person, it came from choosing not to give up on your own story. And in that moment, she had not been saved, she had simply been given the chance to keep going, without falling, without disappearing, and without losing the part of herself that had always been worth choosing.